Hi, everyone, and welcome to this week's live, where we're going to be speaking about stomach acid and the use of PPIs or stomach protein pump inhibitors. So the reason why I'm focusing on this topic is for two reasons. One is that I've noticed that a lot of people recovering from long COVID are actually really reliant on acid reflux medication, and the other reason is that long COVID itself actually causes dysbiosis and other types of microbial disruption in the gut. So I'm going to share my presentation. So to give you a little background on, the acidity of the stomach. So our stomach is naturally extremely acidic. It's between pH half and 3, which is almost pure acid. And the roles of acid in the stomach are listed here. So they bathe the stomach, they disinfect the stomach, they kill bacteria and parasites, they activate pepsin so that we can digest proteins, they stimulate gastrin and other digestive enzymes, and they also break down proteins. So when we think of digestion, it's really a north to south summary. So it's sort of like a cascade. You can think of it as a cascade. So it starts off with just thinking about food or looking at food or imagining food. And then, we go down to the mouth, which is this mechanical breakdown and enzymatic breakdown of food. And then we go on to the stomach, which again is mechanical and enzymatic and acid and all the enzymes that we use to digest. And we go down to the liver, gallbladder, the small intestine, and ending it with the large intestine. And the thing about digestion, and in particular acid, which is what we're talking about in this presentation, that's really important, is that the stomach, as you can see from this diagram, is quite high up in the digestive cascade. So what this means is that if we're taking acid reflux medication or PPIs, or we have issues with gastric reflux, it means that your digestive system is compromised quite high up in this cascade. And what that means is that every single step along this way, as you can see past the stomach, is going to be compromised because the acid is going to make the food partly digested. The lack of acid is going to not trigger the other enzymes to be released so that these other processes can happen. You can almost think of it as a domino effect. So the acid is kind of one domino in a bunch of dominoes that need to fall to properly digest. And if it doesn't fall, then it's problematic for absorbing nutrients and inflammation later on. So here you can see the small intestine and where acid is secreted in the small intestine. So what happens when we do not produce enough HCl? So you can think of the stomach as a kind of environment. It's sort of a symbiotic environment. And there are different, microbes, good bacteria, bad bacteria, yeast, parasites, viruses, lots of different things are living there. And the acid actually helps to kill, bad bacteria, viruses, parasites, so that the good bacteria can populate and proliferate. And when we don't have enough acid, the population of good and bad are not really in balance and not under control. And what that means is that bad bacteria, viruses, they can overtake and populate. And that's when we have, things like Candida or H. pylori or other types of parasitic infections that can be a result of low stomach acid. So, of course, if you're taking acid reflux medication, you're going to be creating the perfect environment for unwanted bacteria to grow in the stomach. So it's a common misconception that acid reflux is actually caused by too much stomach acid. It's actually often the opposite. If the stomach is really digesting really efficiently, the food will go down. There'll be a mechanical breakdown, a churning. There'll be an enzymatic breakdown. There'll be extremely high acidic environment. And when we don't have these proper variables and we have low acid, let's say, then the stomach is really struggling to digest. And maldigested food kind of goes up into the esophageal sphincter, and then we have this burning that we associate with GERD and basically acid reflux. So it's definitely, it seems counterintuitive, but often supplementing with acid or a digestive bitters or something to increase acid will actually help with acid reflux. So what are the symptoms of low stomach acid? So of course, heartburn, diarrhea, constipation, intestinal infections, as I spoke about, skin issues, hair loss, brittle nails, um, things like, in the extreme case, autoimmune conditions, because I'm sure many of you know that many autoimmune conditions are actually start with intestinal inflammation and leaky gut, intestinal permeability. And what happens is that maldigested food floating around in your bloodstream causes inflammation and can cause a kind of autoimmune response that over time can lead to an actual autoimmune condition. And of course, as we spoke about, if you have low stomach acid, you're not digesting well for many years. A lot of maldigested food, there might be damage to the microvilli, damage to the intestine, and a lot of maldigested food might be entering parts of the body where it basically shouldn't exist. Um, So, what are the main causes of hypochlorhydria or low stomach acid? So, age is one of the causes. So, basically, just as we age, we produce less stomach acid. Stress is quite a big one. As we've spoken about before in other presentations, our body, there's two different nervous system states. There's the flight and flight, and there's the rest and digest. So, of course, in the rest and digest state, that's when we have enough acid and we have, all the enzymes and everything's working and all the energy is going there for digestion. But if you're constantly stressed and you're constantly in a different nervous system state, the sympathetic state, and you're eating, then your stomach's not going to be really ready to handle what it's being received. So of course, acid reflux medication, H. pylori, which is a really common bacterial infection that many people have. This suppresses stomach acid. A zinc deficiency. This is something else that a lot of people with long COVID struggle with, or also have zinc deficiency, and this also causes low stomach acid. And then, of course, things like hyper-processed foods. Just if you're constantly inflaming your gut with foods with pesticides, super processed foods, then it's not going to be producing the right amount of acid and the right amount of enzymes. So how do you diagnose low stomach acid? Aside from, of course, having heartburn, which could be an indication that you have low stomach acid. So there's a test called the Heidelberg Stomach Acid Test. And this is something you'd have to do at a doctor's office, and involves swallowing a small capsule with a radio transmitter that records the pH of your digestive tract at different points moving down. So this is, of course, something that you can't do at home. It's quite kind of a niche test. But another sort of DIY way of doing kind of testing for stomach acid is doing what's called a Betaine HCL challenge. So Betaine HCL is basically an exogenous supplement of hydrochloric acid, which is the same acid that's present in our stomach. And what you can do is try taking betaine HCL with a meal, just one tablet, and seeing how you feel. And then for the next meal and on the second day, try taking let's say two tablets per meal. And then on day 3, taking 3. and just looking out to see when you feel the sense of warming and burning, which means that there's a lot of acid going on in the stomach. And that means you're kind of at your optimal range, your optimal dose. So let's say someone has a perfectly functioning digestive system and they have perfect stomach acid, that they would feel the burning sensation just with one tablet because their stomach's already at the peak capacity. And then there's someone else that maybe has severe stomach acid deficiency, and they might take 5 tablets or 6 and still not even feel any sense of warming. So of course you have to have some reasonable level of body awareness to really do this test. But an interesting DIY way to kind of discern what your level is of stomach acid. And here's an info sheet. So this is an info sheet that I could share with anyone who's interested, that shows, how to do the challenge and what kind of betaine HCL to use. So my presentation's being a bit slow. So how can low HCL be treated? So you have to find out the root cause. So as I said, if the root cause is H. pylori, you can do an H. pylori breath test or a stool test. And then, you need to actually address and eradicate the H. pylori so that it stops repressing the stomach acid. And one kind of caveat actually to this HCL challenge is, if you have H. pylori, which many people who have low stomach acid do, doing something like an HCL challenge would be contraindicated actually, because H. pylori can actually damage the stomach lining. So if you're taking an exogenous form of HCL, it can actually, and you have H. pylori and you have a damaged stomach due to H. pylori, the HCL can actually burn the lining, and then that of course will not be good. So before trying any kind of exogenous HCL supplement or challenge, it's important to really know if you have H. pylori. So chewing food also breaks down the food physically and mechanically, and this makes it easier to digest. Reducing stress, as I said, making sure that you're eating in the rest and digest state. So avoiding water during food, of course, it's really common that a lot of people drink a glass or 2 of water while eating, and really we should avoid all water, half an hour either side of a meal, so that we can get this real concentration of acid and of enzymes and not be diluting it. And of course, avoiding processed food, as I said before, which will affect the acidity of the stomach. And another way, of course, to actually, if you feel like you want to start with something more gentle than doing a betaine HCL supplement, you can use something like a digestive bitters. And digestive bitters, they basically, here are some examples of brands that I really like. They're very bitter herbs, often things like dandelion is really common, fennel. And the bitterness of the herbs actually stimulates the digestive juices. There's a signal that gets sent from the tongue, down the vagus nerve to the liver and to the stomach, and this really bitter flavor triggers our stomach and our liver to produce enzymes and to really kickstart digestion. You can almost think of bitters as sort of like a gym workout for the digestive enzymes and acid. And these kind of flavor profiles of extreme bitterness are not really so common actually in our, with our modern palates, which are very focused on sweet foods and carbohydrates and often just very kind of flat flavors. And our body has really evolved to also experience these very bitter flavors. So using a digestive bitters can also be a great way to kickstart digestion. So if anyone would like to see the rest of the presentation, I talk more about how bitters work, and I talk about also how to wean off a protein pump inhibitor if you are actually taking one, which is really important. There are certain supplements that you need to. There are ways that you can prepare your body and prepare your stomach to wean off the PPI, which can often be quite difficult because the body starts actually producing more acid when we suppress acid over a long period of time. So then when we try to wean off, it becomes really difficult. So I'm going to stop there. The rest of the presentation is on the Phoenix Learn program. So if anyone has signed up for the Phoenix Learn, you should be able to access it there. But in the meantime, I'm going to answer some questions. Is there a test for how much stomach acid is in the stomach? Yes. So I spoke a little bit about that. There's a test called the Heidelberg test, where you swallow a little radio transmitter and it basically measures the pH of your stomach. That's a very technical way of doing it. Otherwise, you can do the Betaine HCL challenge, which I also spoke about. Can gut issues cause sinus issues? I feel like my gut was affected from COVID and constant diarrhea symptoms, and my sinuses are bad. So yes, definitely. So when we think of our microbiome, that basically includes any kind of mucous membrane. So we can think of the sinuses, the throat, the vagina, the intestines, any kind of mucosal membrane has a microbiome. So definitely if your gut health, if you have dysbiosis in the gut, it's likely that it's in other areas too. And then we can really support our microbiome through, as I said, making sure that bad bacteria are eliminated and then repopulating with good bacteria, and then feeding the good bacteria with good food and with things like prebiotics. So, if you're able to do something like a GI stool map, it's quite useful to know exactly, because that will tell you exactly what good bacteria are there and what bad bacteria are there, and what kind of parasites, yeast, fungi, inflammation is there. And that will help you just to be more targeted in the approach. I'm really starting to think my halitosis is due to digestive tract. I'm doing so many things to help, such as better oral care, gut health in check by microbiome. So it is true that sometimes bad breath is caused by digestive issues, and if you're someone who is sure that you don't have H. pylori, I would recommend trying an HCL supplement for a few days just to see if that really changes things, because if you imagine this idea of, say, getting a blender and putting a bunch of food in it, and like vegetables and fruits and different things, and you blend the blender and then you leave it outside in the sun on a hot day. Imagine how disgusting that food will be. And that's basically what's happening in our stomach when we don't have good acid and when we don't have good enzymes. The food is just kind of rotting and not being digested well. So yeah, that can definitely cause bad breath and microbial imbalances in the mouth. But of course, one thing that can also really help in terms of dental care for halitosis is tongue scraping. So if you have something like a copper tongue scraper and you can use it every morning, this is something that really helps, as well of course, flossing and just normal things like oil pulling. These kind of dental hygiene things are good, especially the tongue scraping, but definitely the digestive tract will play a role. Is antibiotic the answer, or ivermectin to get rid of parasites in the stomach? So again, it depends on the type of parasite. that you have. So if it's been identified through something like a GI stool map, there are, natural parasite cleanses. You can go through, I mean, you have to work with a specific practitioner to do a parasite cleanse, but it's completely possible to do it naturally without using antibiotics. Um, and yeah, but what would be good is to actually have a diagnosis with what type of parasites that you have through something like a GI stool map. And usually, as I said at the beginning of the presentation, um, if you have parasites, it probably means that something else is going on in the gut, like you don't have enough acid, because those shouldn't have been allowed to live and proliferate. So usually when something bad is living and proliferating in the gut, it means there's not enough of the good things to basically do this kind of war and help overpopulate the bad things. So it's not just about eliminating bad, but also making sure that the environment is good to not let that happen again. And the issue with antibiotics is really this thing of you're going to eliminate, but you're eliminating both good and bad things. And then of course your stomach is just going to kind of reset to how it was before with the same kind of issues that you had before, in terms of like an imbalance of the populations of bacteria. So this is really important. I have prolonged stress from long COVID and have developed chronic stomach pain when eating protein or hard food. How do I know if it's caused by too little or too much acid? Um, so yeah, so long COVID does cause dysbiosis, and the exact type of dysbiosis that you have can only really be determined if you have a GI stool map, and then you can know what is going on exactly. So yeah, that's what I would always say to people. If you're able to do a GI stool map, then you can be really targeted. You can take an antimicrobial for this specific bacteria that you have. You can supplement one specific type of bacteria that is missing, and maybe other ones are good and one is bad. You might need to do a candida, a candida protocol. You might need to do an H. pylori protocol. We're kind of stabbing in the dark, unless you really know what's going on. But of course, there are general practices that really help. So as I was saying at the beginning, chewing the food properly, being in a non-stress state when you're eating, not eating food that contains, glyphosate or pesticides or super processed food. Um, Things like taking a digestive bitters to really stimulate the juices to be released when we're eating. All of these things, it's good to kind of work on these very baseline things and see if we can get better with that. And if we can't, then it's always more useful to do some testing rather than just try random protocols. Um, okay. So someone else is what's a natural medicine or food for stomach acidity? Um, yeah, so the bitters, the digestive bitters are really good to increase stomach acidity. And you can also try apple cider vinegar, actually. That's one way to, again, stimulate, because apple cider vinegar is actually acidic, but it also stimulates okay, someone just asked a question about vinegar. Drink vinegar diluted with water before a meal. Okay, yes, or someone asked about pickle juice, sauerkraut juice for acid enhancement and probiotic qualities. So yes, definitely. So the good thing about apple cider vinegar is that if anyone watched the blood sugar regulation one last week, is that apple cider vinegar has a really positive effect on mitigating insulin spikes. So if you drink some apple cider vinegar with water before, let's say, having some kind of high carb meal, like something with rice or pasta, it will actually help to mitigate the insulin spike. And if you have a raw unpasteurized apple cider vinegar, it will help mitigate the insulin spike, add acidity to the stomach, and also have that probiotic quality that that whoever commented also mentioned with the sauerkraut juice. So something like the raw unpasteurized apple cider vinegar is really great, and that's a good way to kind of start experimenting with this project. If you're unable to get bitters, or you can try it alongside bitters and also see what works best. But yeah, all of those things definitely are great for helping digestion. I think that's all the questions. Yeah, thank you everyone for listening. And yeah, if you want to check out the rest of the presentation, go on to the Phoenix Live, the Phoenix Lives that are part of the Phoenix Monthly program that I'm sure some people already signed up to. And yes, if there's any more comments, you can comment. Any more questions, you can comment in the comment section, and I can point in the right direction in regards to some of the things I talked about, like the Betaine HCL challenge or a PPI weaning protocol, for example. So thank you very much, and I will see you next week. Bye-bye.